This is my Honda VTR1000F, and we're going to be fixing a leak right here. This is a manual cam chain tensioner. There are two of them, one for each cylinder. What we have is we've got oil, it's getting onto the threads and it's leaking out. It's kind of flowing down the threads and dripping down here. Now you only find this happen with the rear. With the front cam chain tensioner, it's installed in this direction, and so the threads are kind of pointing upwards, so you're not going to have oil that flows upwards, right? But with this, because it's facing this direction, oil that's inside the engine is going to get onto the threads and it's going to flow down and come out here. The fix is pretty simple. You don't have to take everything apart or take the valve cover off. That would be the proper way to do it, but I'm going to show you a little trick to get this done a lot easier. First thing we're going to do is take off the crank bolt cover and also the crank position sight window cover. If yours haven't been removed for a really long time, they might be stuck, in which case you'd want to use a hammer to get your hex bit properly seated in the socket, and also maybe use an impact wrench or an impact driver of some sort on a very low setting. Then we're going to put the crank in the right position. So it's the rear we're going to be working on. So we want to put the rear cylinder in top dead center on the compression stroke. You don't want it to be on the exhaust stroke, because what we're trying to achieve is for the cam lobes to not be pushing down on the valves. This is to make sure that the chain is in its most slack position. It's not going to have any tension on it. Normally when rotating the crankshaft and trying to find top dead center, you'd want to do this with the spark plugs removed, because then you wouldn't be fighting against the compression. But in this case, since we're being lazy buggers and we're trying to do this the easy way, we actually want to be fighting against the compression, because that's going to tell us by feel which stroke we're on when we find top dead center. So you can see here that I'm kind of wrestling with it to turn the crankshaft. This is very likely on the compression stroke. Now mind you, I've actually cut the footage where I rotated the crank a few times to get a feel for the difference between top dead center on the compression stroke and on the exhaust stroke. And right now I'm fairly sure that this is top dead center at the end of the compression stroke. Then we're going to go around to the rear cam chain tensioner and we're going to loosen the lock nut. Once the lock nut is loose, you're going to notice that it's really easy to turn the tensioner just with your fingers. It's almost like there's no resistance even if you try to tighten it. And that's another indicator that you're on top dead center on the compression stroke. I should have mentioned this before. You should only attempt this method if you're sure or very confident that your cam chain tension has been adjusted correctly. Now I installed these cam chain tensioners only about 5,000 kilometers ago, and when I did that, I did it together with checking and adjusting my valve clearances, and I also measured the play in the cam chain to set up the tensioners. So I'm very sure that the position they were in before I loosened them is the correct tension. So now I'm using a flathead screwdriver just to get that old O-ring off. There's this old O-ring that came with the tensioner that the locking nut crushes up against, and obviously that wasn't good enough to keep the oil sealed in. So that old rubber O-ring has turned into black mush and it's stuck to the thread, so I'm using a flathead screwdriver to pick that out. And I'm unscrewing the cam chain tensioner as I'm picking at it with a flathead screwdriver just to get all of that old mushed up O-ring off. And while doing that, I'm also being very careful to pay attention to how much or how many turns I'm loosening it by. So eventually I stop at 2 full turns out from where the tensioner was set originally. Really handy tip, use these toothpaste tube roller keys for anything that comes in a tube. I use this for sealant, for grease, for epoxy, whatever. And of course I use it at home for my shaving creams and my toothpaste. Absolutely love these. When your tube starts to get about half empty, you can just turn the key, roll it up, collect all that inside stuff, up at the top, and you can get it out with one quick squeeze. It just makes life a whole lot easier. I've linked these in the description below. If you use that link to get yourself some, it will help me and help the channel a lot. So thank you in advance. And I'm using a tiny piece of cardboard to apply the RTV or silicone gasket maker to the threads, which are going to go back into the cam chain tensioner. I'm being very generous with this. If I use too much, it's just going to look messy. If I use too little, I'm going to have to do all this again. Once I'm happy with the application of the gasket maker, I'm going to turn the cam chain tensioner in by 2 turns. Put it exactly in the same position it was in before I loosened it. And I'm also going to put an O-ring on just in case. I mean, it's probably going to get smushed anyway, but it's not going to do any harm. Then tighten up the lock nut, make sure it's snug. Then I'm going to put the crank bolt cover and the crank position sight window covers back on the left side of the engine. And I'm going to leave the bike to sit overnight so that the sealant can fully cure before I start it up again. All right, so now's the moment of truth. If I did everything correctly, then the bike should start normally. And we have success. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, consider sharing this with a fellow VTR owner. Thank you for watching. Catch you in the next video. Bye.
Are you serious, Tony?